Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I'm Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer here at the Center for Victory. With me again is our very, very, very special guest, Dr. Paul Spradley. Welcome again, sir.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of you lately, man. I like it.
And you promised we'd get together when all this, all the COVID stuff goes over. So I'm holding you to that promise. All right. Live here. Everybody heard you say that. So always a good fellow to be around. And, you know, we really didn't necessarily, it might have felt like we planned this out, but our topic for the month is really get connected. And I've asked you to come on and I believe it was last week you spoke about empathy. But let's go deeper into what all is going on in our society now, right? And there's just so much going on. People are freaking out. You know, the thing I have, the quote that, you know, came to mind is you don't get unity by ignoring the questions that have to be faced, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I say that to you, with all that's going on in the world today, okay, what are some questions, situations, issues that we need to address?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question, man. And I think that when we talk about, so I think for this conversation, let's provide a bit of context, right? The world has been at home, and in the last 2.5 months, we've seen Ahmaud Arbery, who was running, be killed by two men who thought that he was dangerous. We saw Breonna Taylor, who was in her home, have police go into her home without a warrant, and they gunfight ensued, and they killed her. We saw George Floyd die in front of us. Like, we watched that happen. We watched him take his final breaths as a man cared like he had no care for George Floyd's life, kneeled on his neck. And then we saw, we had an instance where a woman, Amy Cooper, used her whiteness to call the police. She said, "I'm going to call the police and tell them a black man is attacking me." And then she did, and then her voice started to escalate. And so people saw this woman, and she identifies as I'm a kind woman. I'm a good person. I'm not racist. But yet we saw her do this thing. And so I think the mixture, right, this perfect storm of COVID-19, a health pandemic, a crash of the economy, and widespread social injustice and civil unrest. So I think that context has a lot of people starting to think like, well, why am I just now seeing all this, or what's going on? How can we address this? So when you say you don't get to unity by ignoring the questions that have to be faced, a lot of this right now is people that are coming to the table and asking that same question, like, what questions have not been asked up until this point? How have I missed this? And so I think in this conversation, you know, I think we are talking about issues of race and racism, and that has been something that people have felt. So the narrative in America has been slavery happened, and then Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery, and then some bad people treated black people bad, and then there's a civil rights movement, and Dr. King fixed that, and that is there, and then that was the end of racism, right? Like with Dr. King. That's how people simplify and try to understand race in America. And so I think the biggest question that has not been dealt with is, why are we still, like, why is racism continuing to continue? Why is it just shape-shifting every couple of years? And how is it so deeply embedded in our system? And I think part of the answer is there's been so many people who have not asked the question, who prefer to stay silent because it makes people feel uncomfortable, right? Like, no one wants to feel like a bad person. And so what happens is they say, I'd rather disassociate from this actual thing that's been happening, that is happening right now to people, to my black and brown brothers and sisters. Like, it's happening to them, but because it doesn't happen to me, I have the privilege of disassociating and sort of staying in my world. And I'm not going to ask the question. I'm not going to lean into this thing because I don't want to know, because it's a dirty, scary thing that we've continued to do a great job of not talking about for so long that that I'm comfortable in this space. And that's where a lot of people find themselves. They're comfortable not asking the question, why is racism still here? And if we answer the question, we would see it, we would find out that it's here because it's been passed down from generation to generation, the idea that Black people are lesser than. It doesn't mean that you've outwardly said that. It doesn't mean that you are lynching or violently attacking Black people. But when you benefit from this idea of oppression, like if I'm a white man and I'm able to get a house or move into the neighborhood that I want to because of my whiteness, and I don't want to say anything about how many people of color have been denied living in the same community, then I've made a choice to keep racism continuing, whether it was a conscious choice or an unconscious choice. Most people make these choices unconsciously just because they're navigating through life. I think that question is a really good one. And I think that the idea is, I think the question that I would ask your listeners is, like, why is it now that you are upset about racism that you're seeing? And why wasn't it before? What was the fear that got in the way, right? Like, what was your discomfort that prevented you from having feelings of this just isn't right before the last few months?
Mm-hmm. Now, could you remind us, again, context, remind people what you do? We have you on here so often that I didn't really introduce you again, but can you remind people what you do? Because you're an expert in what we're talking about today.
Thank you, man, and I appreciate that. So I today more than ever take that very seriously, the fact that I am an expert. So my company is called Care-Based Leadership, and the website is carebasedleadership.org. What my sole job, my only job, is to go into organizations and help them have conversations around race, around equity, around inclusion, around sexuality. Really, it's about helping people figure out, how do we treat people that are not like the majority group better? That could be our veterans, that could be people with disabilities, that could be people that are low income. So I go into organizations, I have conversations with people, sometimes the leadership, sometimes the employees, sometimes some combination of both, around what does it mean to create an inclusive environment in your workspace, and what does it mean to better serve your underrepresented clients and customers who may value from your service. You may be doing incredible work, but you also may be sort of looking through them and not at them. Does that make sense? Like looking through them, sort of seeing them as this larger, everybody that we serve is the exact same, as opposed to saying, our clients of color have these unique challenges that they're coming into our services with, right? So that's all I do. And there are a lot of people that want to have these conversations, but not everybody can have them or facilitate them effectively, getting people to a space of growth. And that's something that I think that I have some expertise in.
Absolutely, effectively. And you really, to that question, what I said, you really help people answer the questions that they're probably ignoring, or at least put it on the table. That would be fair to say, right?
That is fair. What I do in that space is I affirm their humanity, because people, they don't want to be vulnerable, right? Like, so this is creating a brand new space where they have to say something like, maybe I have ignored this group of people, right, for a long time. Maybe I don't look at women as peers, but I see them as lesser than in my workspace, because that's something that I've been taught, right? Like, so I help people realize this thing that's internal that also permeates within their culture. And I affirm their humanity in that space. So I'm not coming at anybody from a judgmental perspective. Nobody feels condemned after going through my trainings. But what happens is we identify, and then we start to build. Say, it's almost like saying, I realize that I need to lose a little bit of weight. Now, if you are getting ready to make fun of my dad bod, Eric, don't do it, because I do want to lose weight. I just happen to have kids. But I equate like your growth in equity and inclusion spaces in a similar way. Once you say like, hey, I've got this thing that I can be better at, then you start taking little steps. You don't drop 20 pounds over a week. You say, all right, well, this week I can start drinking a bit more water. Next week I can walk to the corner and back, right? And that's, you're adding incrementally. And that's all that I'm looking to do, is just have the conversation with people, position them so that they are the most in the best position to grow, and then give them some things that they can begin to do on this journey. It's a journey, Eric. It's not something that will happen. You can't end racism with one event, right? You can't change how things are with one post on social media.
Right.
It's the culmination of a bunch of little actions that are disrupting racism.
Yeah. That's a very good point. That's a great analogy to, I mean, it really is, to help people. I think people are just, I think some companies, you know, if we just talk companies, some companies are just overwhelmed with the idea sometimes. What am I going to do? You know, so you talked about the fear and everything around that, right? But just that little incremental steps in the right direction, consistently, constantly, persistently, all time and time again. Very good point. I'm going to hit you with another quote.
Okay.
Dr. Martin Luther King said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." First, what do those words mean to you?
So I'm going to answer your question, but can I say something just for some context?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I challenge my brothers and sisters who quote Dr. Martin Luther King, that, you know, they'll quote and they'll oftentimes talk about his nonviolence, but I say, you know, Dr. King was committed. He made a career out of humanity, which meant that he was often he every day made a practice of disrupting, in his case, racism. And then he was moving towards disrupting economic, separation, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. He was moving into that space as well too. So that's point number one. Like, if you're going to quote Dr. King, not you, but when people quote Dr. King, it's really important that they are also doing the work of Dr. King, right? Like, don't just quote him.
Good challenge to our listeners. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, don't just quote him, but lean into doing the work of disrupting. And then, so yeah, I'll just leave it there. So your question was, the quote was, "Learn to live as brothers." And what was the last part?
"Perish together as fools."
So what that quote means to me is that there is I break that quote into pieces. The first piece is brothers. And what does it mean for you to authentically see me as a brother? We were doing a training with a group of moms on how to talk to your children about racism. And one of the things that came up in our training, one of the things that my wife shared actually, was the conversation is different when you say, because there's some parents on there that have Black and brown children, right? There are white parents that have Black and brown kids. The conversation changes when you say, I have a Black son versus my family is African American. It doesn't sound like there's a big difference, but the difference is in this. If I say I have a Black child, right, there's a little bit of still separation. But when you say like my family, like, you are also owning that as well too. So the first part of this quote calls us brothers, and we have to, going back to the first question around asking the question, why haven't we seen each other as brothers, right? Like, and what does it mean for you to have a brother or a sister? Because it can't mean the same thing that has been happening, right? Like, it can't mean, like, if you saw your brother getting beat up, Eric, you right, like, you would jump in because it's your brother, right? So the first piece of that quote was it's building this relationship that we are brothers and sisters, and if we're not there, then we have to start there first. The second piece of this, when you say we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools, that's talking about this idea of us either being together and operating together and supporting each other as a family, or we're going to be separated. And, there's the words that say, like, I'm drawing a blank on it, but it's essentially a similar saying where we will stand United we stand, together we fall, kind of thing like that, right? If we're separated, if we're individual, we're weaker, and we're going to perish, because we're going to do the things that are comfortable for us individually, and not the things that I need to do from an accountability perspective to love my brother, to love my sister. Because it's not just sitting in the background being quiet. If you love me as your brother, then you're going to act differently towards me, right? Like you won't be afraid when you see me coming out of the gym with my hoodie on, right? Like I just got done working out and have my hoodie on, and you see me. If I'm your brother, then you see me. Does that make sense? Like you're not afraid, and you're not tightening up because I look dangerous to you. Like you see me as your brother. So the first thing is really the idea of putting in the work of us being brothers and sisters, of us loving our neighbor. That's at the root of this entire thing for me, man, is the work that has to happen of being brothers and understanding. Martin Niemöller was a pastor in World War II, and he had this quote that became really famous, and it said, first they came, and if your listeners want to Google the poem First They Came, it's short, and it uses some sort of older language, but you can sort of just modernize it. So first, it says, first they came for the communists, but I didn't stand up because I wasn't communist. Then they came for he used some word that kind of talked about Republicans and Democrats sort of back then. He said, then they came for these folks, the libertarians, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't them. That wasn't me. And then they came for another group, and I didn't speak up because that wasn't me. And then they came for me. And by that time, there was no one left to speak up for me, right? That quote really builds this connection of we are all interconnected. And if we don't start to look out for each other, eventually we're going to be the other that needs looked out for. And there's going to be no one else to look out for us. He's a white male pastor who said this during the time of Hitler, right? Like he was saying that we need to, first they came, the Nazi army came for this group. And I didn't speak out because that wasn't me. Then they came for these folks, and I didn't speak out because it wasn't me. Then they came for these folks, and I didn't say anything. So his silence ultimately was his own prison. Man, that's powerful. His silence was ultimately his own prison, his own demise. And that's what I think Dr. Martin Luther King is saying in this. We must learn to live together as fools or perish, or I'm sorry, live together as brothers or perish as fools, is really a very similar thing. Like, we're either going to actively do this and be here and support each other and be a stronger unit, or we're going to continue to be separate and perish.
And do foolish things. I mean,
Foolish things.
I mean, it just
like not see me as your brother.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you suggest to anyone who's looking to overcome what I call that blindness, right?
Yeah.
And learn how to love and interact with somebody who may just be different than them.
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of practical points. My wife and I are also doing a webinar on how to be an ally to Black and brown people. This is really important because we've heard feedback to our company that says, hey, I don't want to ask my Black friends about their experiences because I feel like I should know this stuff already, but I want to grow, I want to learn. I just don't know who to turn to get me started and point in the right direction. So we're actually hosting a webinar to help people start that conversation. One of the things that we're saying in that webinar that we're doing is the first thing is being authentic. So for instance, when people say to me when I'm doing a training, well, I've grown up I don't see color. And I would say, well, I feel like you're not telling me the complete truth because I'm literally a different color than you. Like, and then I'll stand right next to them and say, like, there's no way that we look the same. I have significantly darker skin than you. Right? So by you saying you don't see color is saying you don't see me, right? So I would challenge people to have an authentic conversation with themselves. That's what we do in our training. We actually take people to that space in a safe place. So I would challenge you to be authentic with yourself and say, well, what are my biases? And maybe I don't know what my biases are because they're unconscious. I'm just living them out. So let me then start another place. The second thing I would say, if you can't point to your biases easily, you can always have somebody else point them out for you. But that's uncomfortable sometimes if people don't want to start there. A thing that I've encouraged people in this last couple of weeks to do when they will call and say, man, I just don't have the words. I don't know what to say. I would say, all right, well, what would you say? Like, in fact, why don't you write down what you would say to me about how you're feeling about all the things, and then share it with me tomorrow? Because the idea of you sort of not leaning into the discomfort, or not owning your own words, not owning your feelings towards this tragedy, this thing that's going on, if you can't make meaning of it, then when it's time to pass that on to your kids, they won't be able to make meaning of it either. And they will take the easy route and say, oh man, I can't come up with words, and I won't. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, and I wish that there's more I could do, but I'm not really going to own it. Which is the thing that one of the big points, and this is something I want to share with the listeners as well too, is that right now there is like I said, a perfect storm around everything that's going on. So we're highly sensitive to what we're seeing and hearing and feeling. Mm-hmm. What I need as a person who does this work all the time is I need my white colleagues, my white brothers and sisters, to also have emotions and feelings in 3 months when the hashtags are gone, when the statements from companies and organizations have stopped. Are you still able to look around your workplace and say, man, that's not right? Like we have not done a good job of promoting people of color at all. And I'm going to say something, even though I know it's going to be uncomfortable, right? Or will it be in 3 months when you're in the grocery store and you see, a cashier talking down to or treating poorly a person of color for no reason, right? Like sort of making the assumption that they were going to steal something from the store, which, I've seen happen. I've been in line where I've seen that sort of conversation take place. Will you stand up and say something, or will the thing that has happened for much of everyone's lives before this happen, where you see it, you don't say anything, you kind of move on and you disassociate because it's not you? And I'm saying, I want you to think about people that you've not thought about as brothers and make that a commitment going forward. And you're going to mess up, right? And then when you do, you apologize, or you recognize, or you reconcile that with yourself and say, man, I messed up. I missed this big opportunity to tell that person that's not right. How can I be better next time? Being intentional about saying to myself, how can I do something different next time? That's going to be the thing that in 3 months, when I'm posting again and saying, I'm very upset, I'm hurt because this other form of systematic racism, which might be, I might be posting something about something that's happening in a school system, right? Like Black and brown kids continue to underperform, and we've blamed the students for that, right? There's a problem there that parents can speak out about. If you see something that's happening in local law enforcement, then do something different. Vote people out who are not willing to lean into this space of growth. Because if we can't figure this thing out of being brothers, like, it is so true, we're going to perish. Yeah. We're going to perish as fools. And that's I would say that, a few things is putting words to your thoughts, trying to call out your own biases and understand what those things are, and then sustaining the practice of caring for your brother, of loving your neighbor, past the sort of inflamed period of social unrest right now. In a few months, what is your daily practice? What's the little things that you're doing right now that you're able to look a Black man in the eye and see him as a person, as a brother, and not as a danger?
Good advice, as always. Good advice. Very good advice. I'm going to get a little spiritual on you right now.
Do it. I love it.
Okay. So I'm intrigued about, when we look in the New Testament, Jesus really prayed for unity. If you look in John, there's a big prayer by Jesus in the New Testament in John there. And one of the things that he really prayed for is for all believers to be one and be brought to complete unity. Okay. Obviously, we're not there yet. We all discussed that. What can we do to become united, not divided?
So I'm going to take your spirituality and raise you some spirituality. I don't think that is, um, I think that we are sinners. We are naturally sinners, right? We're saved by grace, but we are naturally messed up and broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that my best that I'm bringing to the table is likely going to be a mess. Like I'm still gonna, if I'm bringing just my best to the table, um, it is, there is a very high chance that I will continue to mess things up. That's literally what's happened to this point. Like there's people that are saying, how did things get so bad? What is my role in it? How have I just navigated life? Right. So we need the power of the Holy Spirit. So one of the things that I would love people to begin praying for is uh, the Holy Spirit to help us grow in how we love our brothers and sisters, right? That's a thing that you can do. Like that's a practice that you can practice every day. I have a brother, and I won't say his name because I don't want people flooding him and asking like what his prayer practice is. But we had a conversation. He was on my podcast. He's a pastor locally, and one of the things that he's been doing is praying every day for the Holy Spirit to guide him in his relationship with Black and brown people. Dude, that is powerful, right? Because he knows that he can't do it on his own. And so he's calling in. So when you talk about like, what can we do? If you are a person of faith, man, like part of your action plan needs to be praying for guidance from the Holy Spirit on how to do this thing that you've messed up your whole life, how to do this a little bit better today. And what does it look like? Holy Spirit, I'm praying that you guide me today in my interactions and help me to honor my Black and brown brothers and sisters with my actions and with my voice. So that's the prayer. Help me to honor my Black and brown brothers and sisters with my actions and my voice. And if you can pray that, then that's going to be one of the biggest components of unity, because we can't do this on our own. Yeah. We will default back to messy, disconnected, loving each other in a surface level kind of a way. But we need the Holy Spirit to do that. Like, and Jesus showed us how to do it, right? Like he showed us what it could look like when you don't care what the social stigmas are of the day. He talked to women. He talked to Samaritans as a Jew. He did all the things. He talked to tax collectors, right? Like he was homies with everybody that you weren't supposed to be close with. And people, they'll quote Jesus, they'll quote Martin Luther King, but they don't do the work that Jesus and Martin Luther King did. So my thought is, from a solution perspective, if you are a person of faith, you got to pray for the Holy Spirit around your actions and your voice. Mm-hmm. If you're not a person of faith, I would say then you have to understand what love means for you and take that to a next level. Like figure out, how do I practice loving people that don't look or think like me, right? How do I love that person intentionally today?
Yeah, absolutely. Love has to lead the way. You are definitely right on that one. You've got something to say to wrap this all up for us. I know you have a quote for us as you had last time. Can you lay it on us?
Yeah, man. So I would say my wrap up quote today would be, and it's not so much a quote as more of a directive. Okay. People, I think folks can understand that in order to change a systematic sort of thing like racism, that has to start with movement. Like in order to move a barge, you have to create some movement, and that movement has to be sustained. And that's how you that's how you move this thing that's so big and scared. People are afraid to do the work because, oh man, I don't want to deal with racism because it's huge. Mm-hmm. I can't change it by myself, but you can, right? Like you can influence 5 people around you. Everybody in this world has 5 people that they have minimum that they have direct influence of. And some of the folks that are listening have positions of power in organizations where they can influence 20, 30, 40, 100 people just by speaking up or saying something, right? So, my whole thing is get started. Get started. Don't be afraid. Know that you're going to mess up, but get started. Like the only way that you can get a barge, a really heavy thing to move, is by creating movement. And so my challenge is to create some movement. Let's just start.
Very good. As always, it's been wonderful to have you on. I mean, took so many notes while you were talking there. So I know our listeners and watchers will get good value out of this, and hopefully it will move them to create a little bit of action, and we'll get some speed going on. And then 3 months down the line, we'll continue with that momentum. But thank you so much. Make sure people know again how to get in touch with you, please.
Absolutely. Website is carebased.org. So care-based, BASED, leadership.org. And from there, you can shoot me a message. My email address is on there. And my cell phone is, I post my stuff on social media all the time. So you could find me on everywhere, Dr. Paul Spradley, on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram.
All right. Thanks again, my friend. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I really hope you got value out of this today. Leave a comment down in the comment section below. We'd appreciate if you'd hit the subscribe button as well. Hit the bell icon so you get notified when we post next. If you'd like more information, visit us at centerforvictory.com. And remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you next time.